So, James, as a sign of things to potentially come, South Australia is witnessing a ecological disaster at the moment, is it not?
It is correct, mate. This is something that's not just in South Australia, but also, globally at the moment. We're seeing things like, heat waves in Europe, wildfires. So there is an increasingly severe environmental or a series of environmental crises facing the world all over. In South Australia specifically, most recently we are undergoing like a collapse of our marine ecosystems, shall I say. And this is due to a massive algae bloom that has essentially spread all over the southern coast of South Australia, spanning a total of 4,500 square kilometres from the Fleurieu Peninsula to the Gulf of St Vincent and Spencer Gulf, and up to about 250 metres deep. So this massive spread of algae is reportedly twice the size of the ACT, which is the Australian Capital Territory, larger than than some European nations, for example. So it's massive. And it's pretty much, people have started noticing this over the last few months. There's been increasing reports of mass fish die-offs.
Yes.
So, and we've seen this over the last few months before there was kind of a... before people had kind of come to the realisation that this is what was causing it. But you were seeing, people would go for walks along the beach and see all manner of sea creatures, sea life, fish, crustaceans, etc., all washing up dead in large numbers.
Yes, just the other day I saw that a dolphin had washed up dead as well.
Exactly, yeah. And this is obviously to great concern, as most of our population here in South Australia lives along the coastline.
Yeah.
But more recently, we've had people like, surfers, for example, have been going out into the waves, and they've been coming back with like throat irritation, coughing, sore eyes, sore nose, sore mouth. And there have been lots of people reporting that.
Yeah.
So the full extent of this has only been ascertained in the last few weeks, and it is a result of a large algae bloom of the algae Karenia micomotoi, pardon my pronunciation.
Perfect pronunciation.
Thank you very much. I'm not a marine biologist, but I will do my best. So although that's what makes up the main bulk of this algae bloom, it's estimated that there's potentially several other species of algae in there, and then they also produce toxins which further pollute the water.
Okay.
So what happens is they essentially destroy the gills of the fish that the fish need to breathe and to essentially extract the oxygen from the water. And then
the algae actually just deteriorates the gills of
so the toxins that the algae releases,
Yes.
This is, again, to my knowledge, and I'm not a marine biologist, the toxins destroy the gills of the fish, while the algae itself sucks the oxygen out the water.
Okay.
So we get these massive dead zones in which essentially the water isn't oxygenated and the fish can't breathe.
Yeah, of course.
So the fish die, and then you've got, crustaceans, like cuttlefish, cephalopods, all sorts of marine animals are being affected by this. And so to the casual observer, they might say, well, hang on a second, this is only killing fish. What about dolphins, for example, or whales or other animals? And to my understanding, what happens is when you have a massive part of the ecosystem essentially rendered, removed from that cycle, it affects the rest of the ecosystem as well. So then, dolphins don't have the food sources that they would have had prior because everything else is dead and dying and wasting away. And it's pretty kind of scary. There's been quite a few reports, especially recently in the last couple of weeks, because what's happened is this bloom has actually started spreading to the kind of suburban beaches here in Adelaide.
Yes.
So whereas beforehand it was more in the more rural areas, people have started seeing this and measuring algae at like the Port River, for example.
Yeah.
So as soon as it starts affecting the, complacent beachside bourgeoisie, that is when it becomes a bit more of an issue. So lots of kind of reef areas, smaller reef areas that we have, and and around jetties and that sort of stuff, kind of rocky areas that usually have kind of pools of marine life. Lots of researchers and biologists are now being shocked because these are all just completely dead.
Yeah.
So it's pretty scary.
Yeah. For sure.
It has now, by June, so about a month and a half ago, this algae is actually now spread to the Coorong.
Okay.
So for anyone that doesn't know, the Coorong is like one of the most ecologically diverse regions in South Australia, I would say. It's essentially I think it's over 100 kilometres, this region, essentially where it's the mouth of the Murray River, which is the biggest river in Australia, comes down from New South Wales, and where all the water exits into what we call the Southern Ocean. So this area is essentially a large, it's a huge region of wetlands, lagoons, lakes, and it's just home to heaps of unique wildlife like birds, frogs, fish, all that sorts of stuff. The Coorong's actually had a pretty rough ride recently. Over the past, say, 20 to 30 years, it has been severely diminished. Yeah. And this is due to a couple things. This is due to, for example, in the early 2000s, we had like a pretty horrific drought. I remember being younger, and then everyone had water restrictions imposed on them, for example, that sort of stuff. So years of continuous drought also combined with years of poor flows into the Murray, lots of the time attributed to practices upstream. So, for example, in New South Wales, inland New South Wales, floodplain harvesting, for example, irresponsible use of water for irrigation, people that have decided that growing rice, which is a hugely water-intensive crop, and, a bunch of big agribusinesses have decided that, let's get the driest continent in the world and let's grow one of the most water-intensive crops in the world. Yeah. So this has been a bit of a political issue over the last few years, but all these kind of things have compounded together and have severely damaged the Coorong. So reportedly before this, it was at about 30% of its ideal health, and people, environmentalists and biologists, are worried that this could potentially be the final nail in the coffin for this really quite unique part of the world. There's nowhere else in the world really like it. So where's this all come from, Jordie?
So what have they attributed to causing the algae?
Oh, Jordie, I'm glad you asked. This isn't necessarily one of those things, I think, where there's a direct correlation between one thing, and it's not something. It is the kind of thing that could occur completely naturally without human intervention. Yeah. So from what I've seen, it seems to be attributed to kind of three main factors. So especially kind of in the second half of last year, really high marine temperatures. So the water is much higher, like the temperature of the water is much hotter than usual. Yep. We've also had the flooding of the Murray River in 2022 and 2023. So what this did, this was pretty catastrophic. It was all over the news here. Again, this huge river system experienced massive rainfall, and we had these huge floods. And so what happens is all these nutrients and minerals, etc., in the soil that are usually found inland have all just been dumped out into the ocean.
And could I ask, these nutrients and minerals that have been dumped, these are man-made nutrients that are used in agriculture potentially?
No, not necessarily. Okay. It's more just the things that are in the soil, for example. Okay. Yep. So the things that typically plants would feed off of in soil, all these have in a huge quantity been dumped into the ocean. Yeah. And then combined with what experts believe to be cold water upwelling in the summer of 2023, 2024, which has brought lots of these nutrients from deep, because obviously the sediment will sink down, and then they get brought up deep onto the surface, and then combined with this marine heat wave, it is the perfect, it's like a giant petri dish essentially, in which the algae, it creates the perfect conditions for it essentially. Again, I'm not a marine biologist. This seems to be quite straightforward to understand. Yep. But there are several factors at play. And I think it's important, obviously, that we have good, comprehensive ecological and environmental management so we can manage these sorts of things in the future, because this is quite devastating. So we've got lots of the local kind of industries in these regions, especially kind of around the Fleurieu Peninsula. So like, Goolwa, Victor Harbour, the general Coorong area, which you're quite familiar with, as am I. Lots of people that, for example, that rely on fishing as their primary source of income.
Yep.
Well, there's no fish anymore. They're all dead.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Tourism. Lots of people come, from all over Australia, all over the state, even all over the world to come to see this beautiful, pristine environment. And again, it's all dying.
Yeah.
So it's not good. And it's going to be a massive economic hit.
For sure.
I believe. So lots of politicians are lobbying the federal government to declare a state of emergency.
I've seen this recently. Yes,
yes, correct. And which is valid. And there's kind of this sentiment. If anyone watching from Australia, specifically South Australia, you probably realise that no one in Canberra really cares about what happens in SA. We're economically not very important. We don't have a huge population. Yeah. We're not strategically important. We're not like a Darwin, for example, where they pump heaps of money in there to, project power out into the Indo-Pacific region, for example. It's just kind of sleepy little South Australia where bugger all happens. So there's a bit of discontent, shall we say. The Federal Minister for Environment and Water, his name is Murray Watt, funnily enough, at the River Murray, he said like he would certainly consider any request for assistance from the state government, but he's also said that, look, where this is happening is primarily in state waters, so it falls under the jurisdiction of the state government.
The state government,
yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And then, so SA Greens Senator Sarah Hanson-Young has kind of, said, well, that may be true, but we do need some sort of assistance here, you know what I mean? And she's kind of pinned it on him by saying, you don't want this to turn into a I don't hold a hose, mate moment, akin to Scott Morrison,
of course,
our ex-Prime Minister, who very famously went overseas during some of the most catastrophic nationwide bushfires in recent memory, and then when asked, why weren't you doing anything about it, he was like, well, mate, I don't hold a hose, I'm not a firefighter. So they're saying, look, there could be political repercussions, and if there are, it's going to reflect badly on you guys.
And I guess the least the federal government could do is at least put it into the national conversation and provide some sort of assistance. Correct,
yeah. Because again, if this is happening in Bondi, if this is happening in Sydney,
of course,
you know what I mean, it would be a much bigger part of the conversation, like you're saying, because it's happening here in South Australia. Yeah, no one really cares. Even I think probably lots of people in Adelaide don't really know what's going on as well.
And it's sad in some ways because, as you mentioned, I don't think Bondi or even like the Sunshine Coast, for example, are considered like very delicate marine environments.
No, not at all. Unless you want to maintain the diverse ecosystem of investment bankers and Brazilian bar workers, for example. Yeah, so look, it's one of those things where I think possibly the federal government will actually step in and maybe provide, maybe even some economic relief. That's certainly what the South Australian state opposition leader for the Liberals and slippery used car salesman, Vincent Tarzia, has called for.
Wait, sorry, who?
Vincent Tarzia.
Who's that?
Well, apparently he's a leader of the opposition.
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty sure he tried to sell me a shitty 97 XL, a Hyundai XL on Port Road a couple of years ago. Yeah, he's just a pretty slimy looking character. But I'm not going to hold that against him because I actually agree with what he was saying here. Because he's kind of said, look, we need to have greater collaboration between the state and the federal governments. We need to provide relief. We need to provide assistance for the fishermen and fisherwomen and members of all different industries who are affected by this.
I'm glad to see as opposition leader he's actually rallying behind a good cause.
Exactly, and you never let a good crisis go to waste. So Vincent Tarzia, all right, good work. And if that prompts a bit of political motivation for the state government to do more.
And what has the state government done? What's the Premier of South Australia done?
They haven't really done much. They've kind of been like, we need to monitor this more.
Okay.
I was down at Middleton Beach about a week and a half ago. Just purely for work purposes, and then all along the beach, for example, there's signs saying, do not go in the water, algae bloom has spread, please report. So there are kind of administrative measures they're undergoing. Whether they've actually done anything, concrete to address it, I'm not sure. And I think you can't really do anything now.
It's difficult to react to these.
You can't do anything now that it's there. I think there's kind of environmentalists have said, look, we can, for example, try and support, in the future, like kelp and seaweed growth, pardon me, for example, as that will help, kind of catch the algae, stop it from spreading, that sort of stuff. But now that it's here, you can't do much about it. So people are hoping that with lots of the cold weather and the rain that we've been having recently, that'll kind of flush lots of the algae out, and obviously the cold temperatures bring the temperatures down, which isn't good for algal growth.
Yep.
But we'll see.
Well said, James.
Thank you very much. So look, there's no singular party or singular thing that you can directly attribute to the ongoing disaster. But like I said, I think you do need to have on all fronts, especially in a place like Australia, where our ecosystem is quite fragile.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we're one of the most
unique as well.
And unique,
sure.
yeah. And we're really susceptible to climate change. We are, like I said, in South Australia, we're the driest state in the driest country on the planet. So you do really need to have comprehensive environmental management. And look, that's one thing I will say about Australia as a whole and the Australian government, and I think that's kind of one of a key pillar of our national identity, shall I say, is appreciation for our environment, for example.
And conservation.
Yeah, and conservation.
Okay.
I think Australia has been pretty good at that, but as the climate changes, which it is changing, I know some people don't want to believe that, but it is happening, these things are going to become more and more important to us. So we can continue to, again, have our existence the way we have it now, where we have this comfortable sedentary lifestyle, for example, in the same place. And if we don't want to lose that, then we need to have more radical and more wide-reaching comprehensive solutions to kind of mitigate and address some of these problems going into the future.
I was just going to say as well, I think it highlights, this algae bloom, for me, highlights how very minor changes in temperatures or nitrate levels, for example, can cause such catastrophic outcomes as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So people talk about, say, 0.5 degree or 1 degree temperature change, and I think this really demonstrates how such a small variable can impact an environment. So
absolutely, and you have the classic kind of boomer talking point of being like, global warming, mate, bloody freezing outside, what are you talking about? And you think, well, you're not wrong, but at the same time, no, our average temperatures are going up. Yeah. We are putting out more CO2 into the atmosphere.
And sea temperatures as well.
Sea temperatures are rising. The ocean is one of the biggest carbon sinks we have, essentially. And it's not just one issue, but, for example, you have compounding issues. Yeah. So you have, for example, at the bottom of the ocean floor, you have lots of greenhouse gases that are trapped down at the bottom of the ocean floor that stay there due to the temperature and the pressure because the ocean is below a certain temperature. So as soon as they get released, for example, due to rising ocean temperatures, then it's going to cause an exponential change. Yeah. And I actually personally don't think the issue is just about CO2 parts per million. That's kind of the thing that lots of people talk about.
Yes.
And again, I'm not a climatologist, obviously, but I think you have to kind of address all aspects of it, because I do believe there is a part of the, shall we say, the NGO, the global liberal establishment NGO class that kind of uses that uses that as a tool to hinder economic development in certain parts of the world to maintain their hegemony. I do believe personally, that's me being really cynical, but I do believe that is a fundamental aspect or one of the angles that are used. But at the same time, it is such a wide-reaching issue, and it's not just CO2 parts per million, but it's just environmental destruction. If you're destroying the Amazon, then you can't capture that carbon again. You have less capacity for the Earth to, self-regulate these things going into the future. And like you said, you have one thing happening in one part of the world, and you have these compounding effects in other parts of the world. Or you have one thing happening in one part, you have a massive floods 2-3 years ago in, New South Wales, for example, and now 2 years later you have an algae bloom here in SA. So these things do all compound, and they're connected as well. And they are all connected, and they do all add up. And at the end of the day, all we can do in Australia is look at the things that we can control. Yeah. So we can't do anything about pollution in the Philippines. No. But we can do, and that's also an argument the right wingers always use. They always say, and the anti-climate changers say, why should we watch our pollution when, India is continuing to pollute, for example? Yeah. And look, I just don't see that as a valid argument, because at the end of the day, we all breathe the same air. Yeah. We all live on the same earth. I'm not trying to get too kind of hippy-dippy greeny about it, but this is a real consequence. And
why not step up and be the leader of that as well?
Exactly.
Actually causing a long changing environmental protection.
Yeah,
So.
and that's the thing. I think we are an economically developed country where we have the resources to do this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Lots of other developing countries may not have the resources to do it.
Yeah.
And as the kind of developed world falls further and further out of favour with the developing world, I think that is one way to kind of recapture a bit of political capital as well. Say, look, we're actually doing these things. It's not much, but look, it can be done. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, again, this is going to get more and more critical as we go, I think, within our lifetimes, where we see very drastic changes to our environment. And to quote from, I just wanted to end with a nice quote. This is from a fantastic book known as Tropic of Chaos, Climate Change and the New Geography of Violence by the incredible author and journalist Christian Parenti. He's written, "Political adaptation presents stark choices. There is a real risk that strong states with developed economies will succumb to a politics of xenophobia, racism, police repression, surveillance and militarism, and thus transform themselves into fortress societies while the rest of the world slips into collapse. By that course, developed economies would turn into neo-fascist islands of relative stability in a sea of chaos. But a world of climatological collapse, marked by hunger, disease, criminality, fanaticism and violent social breakdown, will overwhelm the armed lifeboat. Eventually, all will sink into the same morass." And I think that really, obviously, it wouldn't be an episode of Left Hook Media if we kind of didn't bring kind of a bleak political dystopian aspect into it. But I think that really encapsulates the kind of reality that we could be facing within a decade or two if these kind of issues aren't addressed now.
Yeah.
Right.
James does an excellent report.
Thank you very much. If you guys enjoy the content, like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Catch you later. Thanks.